Alright, hello everybody, and in today's video we are going to talk about an actual pattern change that's really on the way. Not just something that's shown 15-20 days out in one model, but something that's actually going to happen, and there is a consensus of across all the models, 7 to 10 days out. So, we're going to take a look at the teleconnections, followed by the upper air map, polar vortex displacement, and how that could impact teleconnections, and of course, how that could impact our surface temperature anomalies and overall pattern, and also discuss the storm track and how that could change. So, let's start off with teleconnections. Pretty much everything is unfavorable, as you probably would have guessed. The AO is positive, the NAO is positive, the EPO is also positive, and the PNA is negative. And to make matters even worse, we have the MJO in probably the most unfavorable phase you could get it. I think it's in phase 5 right now, maybe phase 6, and they both suck. So, here we are. But as you can see, the AO and the NAO are both going to be heading towards neutral and maybe even a little bit negative. So that's a step in the right direction. The PNA also heading a little bit positive, and the EPO also heading a little bit negative. So, everything is going to be getting a little bit more favorable for cold and snowy conditions here in Pennsylvania and really on the East Coast. To those of you who aren't watching from PA, thanks for watching. Thanks for finding the channel, and feel free to subscribe for more, as we will cover those areas, not just PA, in these videos in the following weeks and months. So, now let's look at how that's going to impact 500 millibar map. This is pretty much temperatures about 1,600 or 16,000 feet above sea level. So, right now we have ridging in the east, a pretty strong, pretty potent ridge that's been pretty much sitting on us for the past 3 weeks here on the East Coast. And we've also had a pretty consistent trough on the West Coast with a strong ridge in the Pacific. So, that's been a little bit too far west. It's been over the Aleutians. Ideally, we would want that a little bit further east in the Gulf of Alaska and down into the western U.S., but that's not what we've had. And that's why we've been seeing these above average temperatures for really the past few weeks. Now, fortunately, we've been able to sneak in a few, a little bit overachieving, really, snow events, but, that's not something that's really sustainable in the following, few months if you really want above average snowfall. But, so here we are heading into the next few weeks, or at least starting off the next few days. This continues through mid to late next week, but finally we get a change. Finally, this trough out west starts to weaken, and this ridge out east starts to also weaken. And they pretty much trade spots, so finally we get a trough in the east, ridge out west. Seems pretty impossible to get if, at this point, we've been seeing the opposite for the past 3 weeks, and you've had some people canceling winter, believe it or not, but that's just how it is every year. And I can't really blame them, though, because now we really just have 2 months to work things out and somehow get to average or even above average snowfall, if that's what you're looking for. But here we are. This is now the 22nd of January, and fortunately for us, if you want cold and snow, this looks to continue into late January and probably, I would guess, early February, because these patterns and these real pattern change. This, by the way, you can have pattern changes for, I wouldn't really call it a change, but you can have pattern changes for a few days and then right back to what we had. That's pretty much what we had early to mid this week. Maybe it was mid this week, where we had a few days of pretty cold temperatures and pretty cold wind chills, and then we were right back. But this looks to be a real pattern change, something that's going to last for quite a while. Because in the winter, typically when you get a pattern change, that sticks around for the next few weeks, a month or two. So that's what we were expecting. It's a lot harder to obviously tell if this is going to sit around for the next month or two, but, we could easily see this hanging around for the next few weeks. And why is that? Well, the MJO is probably going to be heading into more favorable phases, and if we do get some kind of polar vortex displacement, that could also help the EPO, which is probably the most underrated teleconnection, if you ask me. So many people talk about how the AO and the NAO are big drivers of the pattern, and, in our winter outlook, we're going to talk about the NAO. Now, it really matters what really matters is the EPO and the PNA. Out in the Pacific, that's what really matters. The NAO, yeah, sure, big storms, maybe sustain, or maybe, that'll have a little impact on how cold it might be, but PNO, or yeah, the PNA and the EPO are really the big drivers of the pattern. And as we talked about earlier, they look to go a little bit more favorable than the NAO and the AO, so that's why we're looking at such a big change compared to as if we would have seen, not much in a change in an EPO and a PNA and more of a change in the AO and NAO. But here we are. Now we're going to talk about the polar vortex. So right now we pretty much have all the cold locked up in the polar regions with ridging. Well, not really. Okay. It's pretty much warmer than average in much of the world besides Canada, the Arctic regions, well, at least in the northern hemisphere. But that's going to change because, as you can see, here we are now getting about 10 days out. It's pretty stretched out, pretty elongated. We're seeing this extension into Central Asia and also this extension into the eastern US. This is where we want it. And this is in the stratosphere. So this often takes 1 to 2 weeks to translate to really the surface and how that's going to impact temperatures on the ground. So this is another thing that could hold down the pattern into at least early February, and perhaps longer than that, because that could result in below average temperatures. Well, this is what we would typically see, but if this hangs around and then, but it doesn't really hang around too long, but it's just another thing that we're looking at that could sway the pattern and impact our temps down the road. But now let's look at temperature anomalies on the GFS ensemble and the Euro EPS. So here we are. Keep saying here we are, but here we are with this big ridge on the East Coast, mainly due to this low pressure, but we're going to be seeing temperatures way, way too warm for this time of the year. Now, you won't be able to wear shorts next weekend, unfortunately, as we will see that cold finally make its way in to the eastern third of the U.S. by next weekend. Now, I say that, but we still have the majority of the cold locked up in the northern plains. That looks to change, though, as we head into the later portions of January. Now, I will say that the GEFS does, and it's been proved pretty much that the GEFS does have a cold bias in the long range in the east and a warm bias in the west. But, we are still seeing some pretty significant anomalies, so even if you factor in that bias, you're probably still going to be seeing below average temps in the east. And I'll show you that because here's the Euro EPS, which has not as much as a bias, but it actually does have a slight cold bias in the Rockies and a slight warm bias in the east. And that's what we are going to be seeing. Now, of course, the Rockies are still cold somehow after that pattern change, but that's probably due to that bias. I can see these areas maybe still being normal, but as you can see, the majority of the cold is in the northern plains into the Great Lakes and eastern U.S. So how is that going to impact the storm track? Well, lately we've had a storm track due to the southeast ridge, just cutting up the central plains. But now we are at first are going to probably see a storm track that we saw earlier in this season, where this low comes up the central plains and then runs into a high pressure, then transfers its energy to the coast. Now, of course, for us here in PA, it transferred its energy, these lows transferred too late to the point where we weren't able to capitalize on it, but areas to our north were able to, which is why, locations like Albany, New York, even with this garbage pattern, are still pretty above average snowfall-wise for this point in the season. So, now we're in January, though, so I wouldn't be surprised to see these low pressures transfer a little bit earlier, which could get at least the northeastern half of PA in on that. But that's being way too specific. But anyways, so we're either going to, at first, have this low pressures track still come up the central plains. So you'll still probably see some snow in the Great Lakes and northern plains, but then that'll probably transfer its energy to the coast and then go up. And I wouldn't be surprised to see areas like New York State and New England see something between, I'd say, the 18th and 22nd. And then we may see a more suppressed storm track where it's not able to just cut up the central plains because we have established cold air and high pressure in those areas, and instead you get a more of a traditional storm track, which goes through the southeast and goes up the coast, kind of a Miller A or a Miller B, but an extremely early transfer. So it looks like things are finally going to be favorable for cold and snowy conditions in the on the East Coast. Now, it's really going to matter just how long we can hang on to this, and that's why you should probably subscribe to a channel like ours, just because if you are interested to see how long this may hang on, well, we'll definitely keep you updated. Of course, if this only lasts for a week or two, then when we go back to the other pattern, that would be unfortunate for probably a lot of you watching this video, but that's probably not going to happen. Just as I said, these patterns tend to hang along for a little bit longer than that. So anyways, there's finally light at the end of the tunnel for you cold and snow lovers. Well, really snow. I don't know how you could freezing as soon as you walk outside, but that's just how it is. But anyways, thanks for watching, everybody. Feel free to subscribe if you want more updates in the future. We're going to really try to make more videos, not just on weather here in PA, but across really a lot of the eastern 2/3 of the US. But thanks for watching, everybody, and stay tuned for more.